He laughed. In front of 2,000 people. He laughed. He held up $10,000 cash and said a rusty Junkyard Farmall wouldn't even make it halfway down the track. Brand new $45,000 John Deere, turbocharged, untouchable, guaranteed victory. But what he didn't know was that inside that faded red tractor was a secret built 8 years earlier, and before the sun set that day, the entire county watched him lose. Stay with me until the end. Before we begin, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. It was 97 degrees at the Buchanan County Fair in Independence, Iowa. 2,147 people were packed into the grandstands. Kids with sticky hands, wives fanning themselves with folded programs, old farmers in seed corn hats squinting at the track. It was the kind of afternoon where the air smells like fried dough and diesel exhaust, and the whole county feels like one living, breathing thing. And right in the middle of all of it, a man named Dale Pressler made the single most expensive mistake of his 53 years on this earth. He pulled $10,000 cash out of his shirt pocket. $10,000. A stack of bills that he'd brought to the fair the same way some men bring a pocket knife just to have it. And he held it up in the air where the whole grandstand could see it. His voice carried over the engine noise, over the crowd chatter, over everything. $10,000, he said. 10,000 says that piece of junkyard scrap doesn't make it halfway down the track. He was pointing at a tractor, a 1961 Farmall 560, red, or what used to be red. By 1979, the paint had faded to something closer to old brick, sun-bleached and wind-worn and stained with 18 years of Iowa soil. There was a dent in the hood from a hay bale that had dropped on it back in 1972. The left rear fender was held on with baling wire. The exhaust stack was more carbon than metal, and the man who owned it, a quiet 44-year-old farmer named Eugene Holtz, was standing right there next to it, hands in his pockets, watching Dale Pressler perform. Eugene looked at the money. He looked at Dale. He said 4 words, just 4, and those 4 words would echo around Buchanan County for the next 4 decades. I'll take that bet. The grandstand went silent. A beat, 2 beats. Then someone laughed. Then another person. Within 30 seconds, the whole crowd was buzzing, and every single one of those 2,000 people was looking at Eugene Holtz like he had just voluntarily walked into traffic. And maybe on paper, it looked that way. Because Dale Pressler's John Deere 4440 was not just a tractor, it was an event. It was brand new, fresh from the dealership in Waterloo, and it represented everything that 1979 believed about progress. Turbocharged 466 cubic-inch diesel engine, over 130 horsepower, power shift transmission, factory air conditioning, a sound-dampened cab that cost more than most men at that fair, made in 12 months of honest work. The sticker price was north of $45,000. It gleamed green and yellow in the August sun like something out of a magazine ad, and Dale knew it, and Dale made sure you knew that he knew it. Eugene's Farmall 560 had cost his father $2,800, used, in 1967. By 1979, it had logged over 9,000 hours of hard work across a 280-acre farm. 9,000 hours. Think about that. If you ran that tractor 8 hours a day, every single day, it would take you 3 solid years to clock 9,000 hours. This machine had given more than 3 years of its mechanical life, every single hour, to the Holtz family's land. And it had received almost nothing back, except basic maintenance and the kind of attention that comes from a man who talks to his equipment the way some people talk to old friends. Dale Pressler took one look at that tractor and laughed so hard, he nearly choked on his cigarette. Now I want to stop right here. Because this story is not really about tractors, and it's not really about a tractor pull. It's about something that runs much deeper than horsepower or dollar signs. It's about what pride does to a man when nobody's around to check it. It's about what happens when a person spends so long looking down at the world that he forgets the World can look back, and it's about a secret that had been sitting in the engine block of a rusted-out Farmall 560 for 8 years, waiting for exactly the right moment to come out. Let me tell you who these two men were. Because you can't understand the bet without understanding the men who made it. Dale Pressler came from what Buchanan County people called old money, which in Iowa, farming terms meant his grandfather had been smart enough, or ruthless enough, depending on who you asked, to buy 800 acres of prime northeast Iowa farmland during the Great Depression, when desperate men were selling land for pennies just to feed their families. By 1979, the Pressler family owned 2,200 acres. They were, by every measurement the county used, successful. And Dale had spent his entire adult life making sure no one forgot it. He drove a new truck every 2 years. His boots cost more than most farmers' Sunday suits. He sat on the county board, the co-op board, the church finance committee, not because he particularly cared about those things, but because he liked seeing his name engraved on plaques. And when a neighbor struggled, when a farm went up for auction, Dale Pressler was there, checkbook open, smile wide, picking up pieces at a discount, adding to his empire one desperate man's loss at a time. He wasn't cruel in the way that makes people obviously villainous. He was the other kind, the kind who shakes your hand firmly and picks your pocket smoothly and calls it business. The kind who never misses a Sunday sermon but can't remember the name of the man who works his fields. He believed, completely and without question, that his wealth was proof of his worth, that a man's value could be read like a balance sheet, that the numbers told the whole truth. Eugene Holtz had come to a different conclusion. His family had arrived in Iowa in 1919, refugees essentially, from a failed homestead in Nebraska. His grandfather had worked as a hired hand for 15 years before he saved enough to buy 160 acres of his own. Eugene's father had expanded that to 280 acres by the time he died in 1965, leaving everything to his only son, not 2,200 acres, not a seat on every board in the county, just 280 acres of workable land and a reputation for never missing a payment, and never raising his voice. Eugene had spent the 14 years since his father's death doing exactly what his father and grandfather had done, working the land, paying his bills, keeping his head down. He didn't go to many meetings, he didn't sit on any boards. He spent most of his time in his barn or his fields, and his neighbors said he talked to his equipment more than he talked. To people, which was probably true, and which nobody who knew Eugene would say was a fault. The Farmall 560 was his father's tractor. The first machine Eugene had ever driven. His father lifted him into the seat in 1962 when he was 7 years old and let him feel the throttle, let him understand what an engine felt like when it was doing what it was built to do. He'd learned everything on that machine, how to plow straight, how to read the soil through the resistance in the pull, how to hear what an engine was telling you by the pitch of its sound and the feel of its power. When his father died, Eugene kept it running. Not because he couldn't afford something newer, but because that tractor knew his land better than any new machine could. And because some things are worth keeping not for what they're worth, but for what they mean. But there was one other thing about that Farmall. One thing Eugene had never told anyone. A secret he'd discovered by accident in the winter of 1971 when he'd pulled the engine apart to replace a cracked head gasket and found something underneath that made him set down his wrench and stand in his cold barn for a long time just thinking. I'll tell you what that secret was in a moment. First, you need to see what happened right before the pull. Because the way Dale Pressler treated Eugene in that staging area, in front of the other competitors, in front of everyone, that's what made everything that followed feel like something bigger than a tractor pull. That's what made it feel like justice. Dale had won the Buchanan County tractor pull 3 years running, 1976, 1977, 1978. His John Deere 4330 had been the machine to beat, and this year he'd upgraded to the 4440 because Dale Pressler didn't just want to win, he wanted to win bigger every year. When he arrived at the staging area on the morning of August 18th and saw Eugene Holtz's name on the competitor list, he thought it was a clerical error. When he walked over and saw the Farmall, he decided to make a moment of it. "Eugene, Dale," said, loud enough for the dozen other competitors to hear. "I didn't know they were letting museum pieces compete this year." A few of the men laughed. Eugene didn't say anything. Dale walked around the Farmall slowly, the way a man walks around something he's about to buy at a yard sale and doesn't want. He kicked one of the tires, shook his head, clicked his tongue. "You know what this tractor's worth, Eugene? About $150, and that's if you sell it for scrap." He looked over at Howard Vance, another competitor farming 320 acres with a 10-year-old Oliver and a loan payment he wasn't sure he'd make come fall. "How much did that new cab run on your 4440, Dale?" he asked himself, not waiting for an answer. $12,000, but worth every penny. Climate control, sound dampening, the whole works. I could pull all day and never break a sweat. Howard said, "Must be nice." But there was an edge to his voice that Dale, as usual, completely missed. Dale turned back to Eugene. "You know what?" he said. "I'll give you $500 for it right now, cash. You can walk away, save yourself the embarrassment, and I'll have something interesting to throw in my barn." Eugene looked at him for a long moment. His face was the kind of face that gives nothing away. "Not for sale," he said. Dale laughed. "Not for sale. Eugene, in about 2 hours, that thing isn't going to be worth the diesel in its tank." Eugene shrugged. "We'll see." And that's when Dale made his announcement. That's when he pulled out the $10,000 and held it above his head and said it loud enough for half the grandstand to hear. That's when Eugene said 4 words back to him. And that's when the whole county leaned forward in its seats. Because something was happening here that went beyond a tractor pull, something that felt like a reckoning. Dale Pressler was certain, absolutely, completely, bone-deep certain, and when a man is that certain, he's not gambling anymore. He's not weighing odds or calculating risk. He's just waiting to collect what already belongs to him. He was already thinking about the story he'd tell later, how he'd made easy money off the county's most boring farmer, how the Junkyard Farmall hadn't made it halfway down the track. He had no idea, not even a flicker of an idea, that he was standing in a trap that had been 8 years in the making. Pride has a way of doing that. It narrows the vision. It makes the impossible to imagine. And Dale Pressler, standing in that staging area with his $45,000 tractor and his $10,000 in his shirt pocket and 2,000 people about to watch him perform, could not imagine losing. That was his mistake. Not the bet. The certainty. Here's what nobody at the Buchanan County Fair knew that afternoon. Here's what nobody in Iowa knew except one quiet man who'd been sitting on it for 8 years, turning it over in his mind the way you turn over a stone you found in a field and aren't quite sure what to make of. In the winter of 1971, Eugene Holtz's Farmall 560 threw a head gasket. It happened in February, in the middle of a cold snap that dropped the temperature to -15, and Eugene spent a week in his barn with the engine torn down to the block, working by trouble light, his breath fogging in the cold, his hands numb even through the gloves. And when he pulled the head off that engine, he stopped. He looked at what he was seeing for a long time. Then he got a flashlight and looked again. The cylinders were bored out. Not stock, not factory spec. Larger, bore, custom pistons, heavier with a higher compression ratio than anything that should have been in a 5 and 60 frame. The camshaft had a profile he'd never seen in any spec sheet, a more aggressive grind that would have pushed the power curve higher in the RPM range. Someone had been inside this engine before, not for repair, for modification. Serious modification, the kind that took knowledge and equipment and intention. Eugene replaced the head gasket, buttoned the engine back up, and started making phone calls. He called International Harvester's regional office. He called a retired IH engineer. He'd heard about from a neighbor. He wrote letters. It took him most of that winter and part of the spring to get an answer, but eventually he got one. His Farmall 560 was a factory test mule. In 1962, International Harvester was developing what would become the Farmall 706, a larger and more powerful successor to the 560 series. Before they committed to a production design, their engineers needed to test components. To do that, they took a batch of 560 frames and modified them, bored the cylinders, changed the pistons, installed prototype camshafts, tuned the fuel, delivery, essentially creating engines that were still 560s on the outside, but were carrying the mechanical DNA of the 706 on the inside. Most of those test mules were supposed to be scrapped when the testing was complete. The 706 went into production. The test beds got destroyed, but one of them didn't. Somehow, through some combination of clerical error or quiet dishonesty, or just the ordinary chaos of a large manufacturing operation, one test mule ended up at a dealership in Cedar Rapids. And in 1967, it was sold as a standard used 560 to a farmer from Buchanan County who needed a reliable workhorse and was happy to find one at a price he could afford. Eugene's father had never known. He'd just thought he'd bought a tractor that ran exceptionally well, which was true, and which he appreciated without needing to understand why. He'd farmed it and maintained it, and when he died in 1965, he left it to his son. Eugene figured it out. And then he kept quiet. Not because he planned to use the information someday. He genuinely hadn't thought about it that way. He just didn't see a reason to announce it. The tractor did what it needed to do. It pulled his equipment, worked his fields, started in cold mornings and ran through hot afternoons, and that was what mattered. But the modifications meant something real in terms of numbers. The factory 560 made about 60 horsepower. Eugene's test mule, with its bored cylinders and higher compression and aggressive cam profile, was making closer to 85 or 90 horsepower, not 130 like Dale's brand new 44440. Nobody was going to confuse it for a modern machine. But 85 horsepower in a lighter tractor frame with a driver who knew every vibration and hesitation and habit of that engine over 17 years, that was a different calculation than the one Dale Presler had made when he pulled out his $10,000. That was the secret sitting in the engine block of the rusty, dented baling wire held together Farmall 560 that Dale Presler had offered to buy for scrap. Now I want you to think about something while the tractor pull gets underway. Think about what it means to know something and choose not to use it, not out of fear, but out of genuine indifference. Eugene hadn't kept his secret as a weapon. He'd kept it the way some people keep old letters or old tools or old traditions, because it was his, and because there was a kind of dignity in not broadcasting everything you know. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to be seen knowing things. He just needed to know them himself. Dale Presler was the opposite kind of man. Everything Dale knew, Dale announced. Every advantage Dale had, Dale displayed. He had a new tractor, so he made sure you'd seen it. He had money, so he made sure you'd counted it. He had wins, so he made sure you'd heard about them. This wasn't insecurity exactly. Or maybe it was, wrapped so tightly in confidence that it had become indistinguishable from the real thing. Either way, it meant Dale had never once in his adult life stopped to consider that the man across from him might know something he didn't. That is a dangerous way to live. And at 4:30 in the afternoon on August 18th, 1979, it was about to become very, very expensive. The open class lined up with 15 tractors. The heat was sitting on everyone like a wool blanket. The grandstands were packed. Dale's 4440 was the clear favorite, not just among the crowd, but among the competitors, serious farmers who'd brought serious machines and knew exactly what the horsepower ratings and the sled weights meant. The International 1466, a pair of case machines that had been built for pulling, a modified Massey Ferguson, and at the end of the lineup, Eugene's Farmall 560, the oldest tractor in the field by at least a decade, looking exactly like what everyone assumed it was. Eugene drew 8th position. Dale drew 12th. The first 7 tractors made their pulls, distances ranging from 187 feet to a full 300-foot complete pull. The International 1466 got the full pull. One of the case machines did. 2. The crowd cheered the big distances and groaned at the ones that fell short, and the whole atmosphere had that particular county fair electricity. Not quite suspense, not quite entertainment, but something in between that can only happen when people who know each other are watching something real. Then it was Eugene's turn. He climbed up onto the Farmall. It wasn't a graceful tractor to mount. The footholds were worn smooth, and the steering wheel was cracked on one side, and the seat had been reupholstered with a piece of vinyl that had cracked along the edge years ago. But Eugene had been climbing onto this machine for 17 years, and he did it the way you do things you've done 10,000 times, without thinking, just moving. He started the engine. It caught on the first crank. A deep sound, surprisingly full for a machine that looked the way this one looked. Not the smooth, turbocharged rumble of Dale's 4440. Something rawer than that, more direct. Like the difference between a polished speech and something a man says straight from his chest when he actually means it. Eugene let it warm up. 1 minute, 2. People in the stands were starting to pay attention just to the sound. He pulled forward. Hooked up to the sled, waited for the signal. Got it. He eased out the clutch. The Farmall moved forward. For the first 100 feet, it looked like any other pull. Tractor working, sled resisting, engine finding its rhythm. At 150 feet, a few people started leaning forward. At 200 feet, people were getting up from their seats. At 250 feet, the whole grandstand was standing. The engine was screaming now. Not straining. Screaming. The way a machine sounds when it's being asked to give everything. It has, and giving it. The exhaust stack was shooting black smoke. The rear tires were digging into the hard-packed dirt, throwing rooster tails of soil into the air. And the sled was still moving. 7 feet. 290. 295. The Farmall 560 crossed the 300-foot line with the sled still in motion. Full pull. The crowd exploded. That is the only word for it. 2,000 people had come to watch a predictable machine win a predictable tractor pull. Instead, they watched Eugene Holtz's battered 1961 Farmall 560 post a full pull in the open class. Beating machines worth 10 times more than his entire farm once had been. Eugene didn't celebrate. He drove back, killed the engine, walked to the water cooler. Drank quietly. 20 feet away stood Dale Pressler. And for the first time in memory, Dale wasn't smiling. That moment said more than any trophy ever could. Eugene didn't perform. He didn't wave. He didn't acknowledge the crowd. Because he hadn't come to perform. He had come to make a statement. And now the finals would decide what kind of man Dale Pressler truly was. At 5:30 p.m., under long orange Iowa sunlight, 8 tractors lined up for the final round. The sled weight had increased by 2,000 pounds. This was where machines proved what they were made of. Respectable pulls followed. 235 feet. 251. 268. Then Eugene rolled forward again. This time the crowd leaned in on purpose. The old Farmall screamed to life, a sound too powerful for something that rusty. At 200 feet, the sled grew heavy. At 250, the tires fought for grip. At 275, it looked like the engine would stall. Then Eugene made a tiny adjustment, almost invisible. 17 years behind that wheel had taught him exactly where the power lived. The tractor responded. 7 feet, best distance of the night. The crowd didn't erupt this time. They witnessed. Then Dale climbed into his John Deere 4440, smooth, turbocharged, powerful, the kind of machine people expect to win. 100 feet. 200. 260, 278 feet. The tires slipped. He adjusted. Pushed harder. The engine gave everything it had, but the sled didn't move. 9 feet short. For 1 second, the entire grandstand went silent. Then the place exploded. Not because an underdog had won, but because pride had been measured and found lacking. The remaining tractors couldn't beat 287 point. Eugene Holtz was champion. First place, $500 and a trophy, and $10,000 owed by Dale Pressler. Eugene walked over calmly, pulled out the written bet, and said quietly, "I'll take that $10,000 now." 2,000 witnesses watched. Dale's face hardened. For a moment, it looked like he might argue, but reputation matters in small counties. He wrote the check. Eugene folded it. put it away, nodded once, walked back to his tractor. No smile, because it had never been about the money. That night, Eugene became a legend, and Dale's slow collapse began, not dramatic, just quiet, Dinah whispers. Fewer meetings, fewer smiles. 2 months later, Dale bought 400 more acres, fully financed. He told people it was an investment. It wasn't. It was pride. Then 1980 came. Interest rates soared. Land values crashed. Farms across America collapsed under debt. Dale owed nearly $800,000 by 1982. His land wasn't worth half. Eugene owed nothing. He had never borrowed, lived carefully, saved carefully. The $10,000 went straight into savings. He said later, it didn't feel like winnings. It felt like a lesson. By 1985, Dale faced foreclosure. 3 days before the auction, Eugene drove to his house. "I'll pay off your loan," Eugene said, "in exchange for 600 acres, your original." Family land. Dale stared at him. "Why?" Eugene answered simply, "I wanted you to see you were wrong. I didn't want to destroy you." If Dale agreed, he'd still have 1,600 acres, enough to survive. If not, Eugene would buy everything at auction. Dale said yes. The deal closed. Dale kept his home. And slowly, something changed. He sold the John Deere, bought used equipment. Started learning from Eugene how to maintain older machines. They never became friends, but they became neighbors who respected each other. In 1994, Dale had a heart attack in his field. Eugene found him, called the ambulance. Sat with him in the dirt until help arrived. Dale survived, but couldn't farm anymore. A month later, he asked Eugene to buy the remaining 1,600 acres. Anyone else would split it up, Dale said. You'd farm it right. Eugene agreed. Paid fair market value, then shocked the county. He deeded 400 acres to Dale's oldest son. Free. Your grandfather built something here, Eugene told him. That still matters. Eugene Holtz died in 2012 at 77. He left behind over 2,000 acres, built not through leverage, but patience. The Farmall 560 still sits in the family barn, restored, running stronger than ever. Every August at the fair, it's displayed near the pull track with a sign telling the story. The bet, the pull, the 9 feet. And if you know where to look, you can still see the tiny stamp on the engine block, a test mule marking from 1962. An engineer once wondered how much power could be pulled from that frame. Enough. More than enough. Because that tractor taught the same lesson on a hot August afternoon. Don't laugh at what you don't understand. Don't measure worth by shine. Rust doesn't matter. Dents don't matter. The sticker price doesn't matter. What matters is the heart of the machine and the heart of the man driving it. Dale Pressler had land, money, reputation. When the moment came, he had 9 feet. Eugene Holtz had 287. And after that, he had everything else.